"Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word.
Well, indeed, Jesus had already healed Lazarus from the dead. Okay, so news had spread far and wide. And as a matter of fact, we find at this time in life, Jesus was living in a pretty lonely area out in the desert with the disciples in a remote town called Ephraim. And so the news of his healing had spread, and no doubt this little border town had some untouchables in it. I say untouchables because skin disease in those days meant you weren't going to be near anybody else. But people had the wrong idea about God in those days, about sickness. They thought that if you had a skin disease, that God had turned his back on you. Skin diseases like leprosy were considered incurable, and it's about as likely to cure someone of a skin disease like that as it is to raise someone from the dead. Till Jesus, there had been no reported case of a cure from leprosy in Israel for 700 years. Touching a leper was like touching a dead man. It was unclean for the body and for the soul. But here they were waiting for Jesus, and a pitiful sight they would have been. And with this group, there would have been no distinction between race. They would have been gathered together in rags. They would have been unkempt and just letting their hair go wherever, and they would have been dirty, and they'd been covering the bottom of their face. And if they came near anyone, they would call out, "Unclean, unclean," so everybody could clear a path for them. When they entered the temple, they would have to go in before everyone else, and they had a special space that they had at least 6 feet away from anybody else. And when everyone left the temple, they would leave last, just in case. But they called out, "Jesus, Master." That's a word of respect. Have pity on us. The text here doesn't say anything about them expecting a healing. Pity could mean compassion. Perhaps, could you take us in? Could you give us some food? So, I think something a pastor would ask, and maybe some of you would ask of these lepers at this point, is, did they understand what Jesus could really do for them? They had a problem on their skin, but Jesus could do a lot more. Jesus offers more than skin-deep healing, a clean soul, and eternal inheritance forever in a family. Now, in verse 14, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." One phrase, one sentence instruction. Go show yourselves to the priest. Now, where do priests fit into this whole thing? Now, if you're an avid reader of the Old Testament, you'd be going, oh. Way back in Leviticus 13 and 14, way back in the days of Moses, there was very specific instructions about skin disease for the Israelites. So really, Jesus was affirming what God had laid down as standard for way back in Moses' time. that it was the priests who was going to be declaring someone clean or unclean. But in that one sentence, Jesus also evoked faith. You see, they weren't instantaneously healed. They had to show an act of faith by even considering going to the nearby priest village. So, as they turned to go, they would have been already showing some faith. That they would need to see the priest for some reason. And have you noticed, too, that often God will give you an impression, a choice, but He'll also ask you to kind of meet Him. He'll ask you to step out. And then, yes, He'll confirm it, but He gave you an impression that you should move in this direction. And then He meets you, and it's a wonderful experience. But He makes us often act in faith before confirming it. So I ask, did all 10 trust and obey? Yes. All headed to the priest, and on their way, the skin disease left them. Now they could go and show the priests and begin the rituals. So how long do you think it'd take for a priest to tell someone that they're clean from a skin disease? Even if they've seen them and their skin looks fine, it takes 8 days. Okay? So they go through all these rituals, cleaning, shaving, all these kind of different things, if you look in Leviticus. So they're on their way to the priests, and they realize they're clean, and now they're on the brink of being able to see their family, maybe their children, be just accepted back into the community. But they're still 8 days away. Now, if that were us, and we'd perhaps been, months, maybe years, begging, lonely, filthy, and rejected, and we could see maybe over on the hill, the village where the priests are, and we had just 8 more days, we could get back to them. Think about it. Would you go back? Verse 15 to 18. We find that God has feelings. Jesus did not cover His disappointment. He wasn't just happy about the one. He was saying, where's the rest? We're not all 10 healed? 9 out of 10 were so caught up in themselves that they failed to respond appropriately to the one who had healed them. Only the foreigner came back. That Samaritan showed Israel and us that worship is an appropriate response to Jesus Christ. Worship. His thanks to God was just as loud as his request for mercy. We would do well to remember that too. We come to the Lord, perhaps over and over again, asking Him, on behalf of others or ourselves. We ask and we ask and we ask. And finally, He comes through. A miracle happens. And do we spend as much time saying thank you to the Lord as we did asking for mercy? I came across a helpful study of responses to Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And for those of you who are more of the study kind, I left some sheets at the back, very interesting to see all the different responses to Jesus. But when it comes to healing, there's 3 main responses that happen. 1, people respond in faith. 2, people respond with thankfulness. And that's our present text today. That's the example of responding with healing and thankfulness. And 3 is witnessing to others. We're going to get a chance a little later on to witness. And those who weren't hardened in the different responses to Jesus, they recognized Jesus as Messiah, as King, as Lord, as Son of David, Son of God, and Teacher. People responded to Jesus with amazement, delight, faith, repentance, obedience, and of course, worship. What is our response to God? That's a good preacher question for you. What's our response to God? In verse 19, then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." The surprise for the disciples was that this impure foreigner was the one who received the blessing. Rise and go, your faith has made you well. Or some translations would say, made you whole. The deeper meaning here, because of the background of this, is more of a salvation meaning. It hints that Jesus blessed the Samaritan with a salvation that is more than skin deep. Faith is present when God does miracles. Even faith is from God. So we should be humble about asking God to do things, because really the faith it took to ask is from Him too. So we come to Him, best engaged with an attitude of humility, committing our situation to God's will. So what lessons can we gain from the one returning to give thanks? Well, number one, sometimes outsiders are more responsive to Jesus. And for us, in Brandon, I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for us. If outsiders, people moving in, are more likely to be responsive to Jesus, then it's a great opportunity for us, for people who they want to learn our language, they want to learn our customs. Why not learn about our Jesus too? Number two, we learn that faith grows with action. They actually had to turn and go. And number three, Jesus heals multiple people from a distance. Even better than Star Trek. So let's not stop praying on behalf of those who need healing, because Jesus can heal multiple from a distance. And He's on the throne of God right now. Number four, God expects thanks from His people. And church, that leads us right now into an opportunity to give God His due credit. And, I confess that, I have missed opportunities in public to glorify God. And I also know what it is to be introverted. You may not know this now, but my siblings thought I would never get married because I was too shy. But thanks be to God, He had some other plans for me. He had me do some other kinds of work and experience some other things, and I got over some things. I realized people weren't so scary. But I know it's not easy for some to say anything in a public setting. But I do know it's a little easier for people to say things in front of family. And what I would hope is that you would start seeing more and more this is your spiritual family. And this is a place where we can open up.